Good day, everyone. This is our last session for this epidemiology course for hospital administrators. So now we'll be discussing a much more bigger picture, no, larger than the hospital setting. We will look into how epidemiology functions as a core engine in public health practice. So we'll be looking at three interconnected areas. So the community development, public health preparedness frameworks, and sustainable development goals. So by the end of this session, I hope you will have a much clearer picture of how epidemiologic data isn't just theoretical, it actively shapes the programs, the policies, and global and national health commitments. So our learning objectives are first, we'll look into the link of community health programs to the epidemiologic process, meaning you'll understand how data-driven approaches are applied in actual community settings, not just in textbooks. Second is to evaluate public health preparedness frameworks and protocols. Specifically, you'll be able to assess how epidemiology informs emergency response systems and where those systems can be improved. And finally, you connect epidemiology to the Sustainable Development Goals or SDGs. And we will discuss some of them. And we hope to understand how we measure progress towards these global health targets using epidemiologic evidence. So let's go first with the epidemiology in community development. So at its core, applying epidemiology in community settings involves five key activities. We assess the first one, disease burden of a community. We perform health needs analysis using epidemiologic data. We let incidence and prevalence figures guide program planning. We evaluate health interventions to see if they're actually working, and we identify risk factors so that programs can be targeted where they're most needed. So I think you're familiar with this cycle, these four steps. Um, this is the usual process cycle, no? In terms of planning and um, developing strategies for particular objectives. So the first one is you assess by collecting community health data. Second is analyzing, meaning you're be able to identify patterns and disparities based on the data that's given to you. And then the third one would be plan, meaning you'll design evidence-based programs and not just design, but also implement the actions, no, that's under these programs. And finally, you have to also evaluate and measure the impact and the outcomes based on the plan that was implemented. So this is a continuous cycle, and the output of evaluation feeds back onto the next round of assessment. So it is a cyclical and it was never a one-time process. So let's see some real examples, no, of how these studies translated into community development. So the first one is again this ongoing study, the Framingham Heart Study. This cohort study identified major cardiovascular risk factors such as hypertension, smoking, and high cholesterol. So they're not just published results in the journals, or it's not just published in the textbooks that we learn as physicians. It directly shaped dietary guidelines, what are community-based cardiovascular prevention programs, and hypertension screening campaigns. So this is a perfect example, no, of how epidemiology findings translate into a population-level action. The second one is the direct observed treatment short course strategy for the control of pulmonary tuberculosis, which was developed by the World Health Organization in the 1990s. The epidemiologic surveillance of the incidence of TB and drug resistance patterns led to the formulation of DOTS, or directly observed treatment short course strategy. So the health workers were deployed based on disease burden mapping. So, meaning where the data showed the problem was worse, and those were the areas wherein the people were sent. So, and in which the DOTS program was initially implemented. So, the result of this, no, when they uh, look into the outcomes, is there is a reduction, no, of by 50% of TB-related mortality worldwide. So even up to the present, we still use the DOT strategy in treating pulmonary tuberculosis. Third one is the PROBIT trial. So this is a study in Belarus from 1996 to 2002. So this is a trial, no, that ran across 31 hospitals, which demonstrated that breastfeeding promotion programs significantly reduced gastrointestinal infections and improved child health. The results reshaped maternal and child health program design across uh, Eastern Europe, since Belarus is one of those countries, in that region. And finally, closer to our country, the community-based dengue surveillance. So there are surveys, the mapping of the incidence, vector density, and socioeconomic environmental risk factors were studied, and based on that data, um, we're able to identify important clinical factors. Again, the host, environment, and the agent interaction will come into play here, and who is the more susceptible in terms of a population subgroup or even a particular geographical location. So this enabled the barangay level mosquito control programs and real-time case reporting that allows a rapid community response to outbreak clusters. So, which means the data informs the action. So, now let's go to the second part, which is how epidemiologic data now affects public health preparedness. So, we are familiar with the four phases of emergency response, as shown here, no? So, the first one is prevention, which would include surveillance systems, risk assessments, immunization programs, and health education. So the epidemiology in this particular step tells us who is at risk, where, and from what, allowing us to intervene before outbreaks can even occur. Second one is preparedness, which would include emergency plans, stockpiling of resources or other uh, important materials, training responders, and interagency coordination. So for this, the epidemiologic data or the projections inform how many resources will you need, no, and what scenarios you need to prepare for. The third one is response. So when an outbreak hits, there is the rapid deployment, contact tracing, you investigate the source or the cause of that outbreak, and finally communicate it to the public. So therefore, the collection, the data gathering, no, during these outbreaks is very important because it guides you in terms of formulating policies and decisions on isolation, treatment, quarantine if necessary, and communication strategies. And then finally, yung recovery, no? So the restoration of services, mental health support, capturing the lessons learned for that particular outbreak or that health crisis, and even system strengthening. So the epidemiologic after action data is critical here to understand what went wrong and what worked, and therefore find ways to improve in order to either prevent another outbreak from recurring, or when the outbreak happens, the action will be faster and the duration of the outbreak will be much shorter. So epidemiology informs every single phase, so from data collection, analysis, and evidence-based decision making. Okay, so what are some of the examples now of how epidemiology reshape, no, in public health preparedness. So again, in the early 2000s, the severe acute respiratory syndrome or SARS happened. So the World Health Organization, the Centers for Disease Control, and partner institutions rapidly deployed epidemiologic investigations, no, of this virus, no, the SARS-CoV-1 in 2003. So contact tracing, case series analysis, and even phylogenetic data to map transmission across 26 countries were made. Uh, because of this, they were able to identify super spreader events and hospital transmission. So, because these are also key drivers that can hasten, no, the development of a pandemic. So, what are the key findings here? So the reproduction number, meaning the again how fast or for every one person infected, how many secondary individuals becomes infected. So the number is 2 to 4, which is relatively smaller, which actually indicates no that the outbreak is controllable with a stringent isolation procedures. So, which is a finding that indicates hope, no, in hastening the end of the outbreak much sooner. And then the incubation period was found out to be 2 to 10 days. So therefore, that now forms the basis of the duration of the quarantine. So it particularly in Hong Kong, for example, so they developed a 10-day quarantine protocols, which is now part of the international health regulations. And then finally, they found out in studies that healthcare workers accounted for more than one-fifth of all cases. So now this prompted the policy of mandatory personal protective equipment wearing of when handling these kinds of patients. So the impact of on frameworks was enormous. So the World Health Organization revised the IHR and in 2005, so that creates a legally binding surveillance and reporting obligations that we've discussed last week. It led to the creation of the emergency use listing and the PHEIC declaration criteria. Again, the public health emergency of international concern. And for those who study the COVID-19 preparedness, the SARS epidemic was the blueprint for contact tracing apps, hospital search protocols, and border health screening. So now let's go to the final theme, which is how does epidemiology relate, no, in accomplishing the sustainable development goals. So we placed here just six. If I'm not mistaken, it's about 18 sustainable development goals, but we will just focus our discussion on six sustainable development goals. So no poverty, this so um that involves looking at the disease burden and poverty mapping, zero hunger. So that's looking into malnutrition surveillance and food security. In terms of good health, by tracking morbidity and mortality of certain diseases. Six is clean water. So in relation to that is looking into waterborne diseases and its epidemiology and other clinical characteristics. The 10th goal would be reducing inequalities. So it is being measured by looking at health equity and disparity analysis and climate action by looking at climate-related health impact studies. So let's go through these six SDGs. So the first one is no poverty. So the World Health Organization Commission on Social Determinants of Health conducted a global systematic review that examines how poverty, inequality, and social conditions drive disease burden. So they analyzed data from 193 countries. So what are the findings? So people in the lowest income quintile would have, so that's the lowest 20% of the population in terms of income has a higher mortality rates of 2 to 3 fold from preventable diseases than those who belong into the wealthiest quintiles. In low-income countries, child mortality from diarrheal diseases correlated directly with poverty indicators because um, usually these low-income countries would have poor access to clean potable water, or uh, there is not enough infrastructure given by the government in order to assure also the access, to safe and clean water. And then out-of-pocket health expenditure pushes 100 million people into poverty annually, which is also a typical case in our country. Um, and then finally, the geographic disease mapping revealed poverty hotspots and its relation, with the clustering of malaria, pulmonary tuberculosis, and malnutrition. So it's related also to uh, the access to proper sanitation, uh, the availability of food, particularly mga nutritious food, and even the crowding and the density, no, of those living in a particular area. So the program impact was significant. So this work led into the Health in All policies approach, which embeds poverty-focused health equity metrics into this first sustainable development goal. So in our country, this directly informed the 4Ps, conditional cash transfer program. So epidemiologic data was used to target communities with the highest disease burden. So um, the main point here, which I think it has already been discussed also in your other courses or subjects, poverty and health are inseparable. Poverty is one of the relevant, uh, sociological determinants, and epidemiology quantifies this relationship. The second one is zero hunger. So this time we'll look into the UNICEF multiple indicator cluster surveys and the DHS program. So these are cross-sectional surveys that uses standardized methods that measured the stunting, wasting, underweight, and anemia prevalence in more than 100 countries. So anthropometric data was tried to investigate, was measured, and they tried to find its association with food security and morbidity outcomes. And some of the key findings here is that the global stunting prevalence fell from 32.6 to 22.3%. And then the wasting prevalence remained greater than 5%, no, in 45 countries, in which the Sahel, South Asia, and Pacific Islands were the most affected by this relatively high prevalence in wasting. Double burden of malnutrition documented and these countries simultaneously experience undernutrition and ironically overweight and obesity. So just like in our country, there's 31% stunting, but there's also a 21% prevalence of overweight Filipinos. And then finally, breastfeeding rates less than 50%, meaning less than half of uh, new mothers uh, in many low to middle income countries correlated with 1.5 to 2 times higher infant diarrhea mortality. So these findings directly in correlates, no, to the availability of nutritious food and its access to especially to the lower income uh, group. So because of this, there are some programs, no, that were developed, such as yung Scaling Up Nutrition Movement in more than 60 countries, and it drove the prioritization of community management of acute Malnutrition Program or CMAM. Now, for the third goal, no, which is good health and well-being. So perhaps this is most directly linked to epidemiology. So the study here now is the global burden of disease, which is still ongoing now for more than 3 decades. It systematically quantifies mortality, morbidity, and risk factors in 204 countries. And it's able to measure yung disability adjustment life years, the years of life lost, and years lived with disability estimates. So, what are the important findings here? Ischemic heart disease is the leading global cause of death. And there's a before it's the infectious or communicable diseases that account for majority of deaths worldwide. But currently, or the latest data shows that non-communicable diseases now account for about three-fourths of global deaths. And then the universal health coverage index improved from 45 to 68. And this is measured by epidemiologic service utilization tracers. Mental health disorder accounts for 13% of global disease burden. And finally, those who die, before 5 years old fell from 93 per 1,000 kids to 37 per 1,000 kids. And this is tracked by a vital registration and survey epidemiology. So therefore, this study, the global burden of disease, directly informs this target monitoring, and countries use this data to prioritize health spending and report it to the UN voluntary national reviews. So there's also its importance of integrating yung mental health care into the health system of various countries. Okay, and then this one, clean water and sanitation. It matters because there are waterborne diseases due to lack of accessibility again to potable water and poor sanitation conditions. So this time the study would be again undertaken by the World Health Organization and UNICEF. It is a joint monitoring program in the Prus-Ustin Wash Burden Study, which was initially performed in 2014 and updated 5 years later. So it quantified the global disease burden attributable to unsafe water, sanitation, and hygiene across 145 countries. So what were the findings or the results? So unsafe wash causes 1.4 million deaths and 74 million um, dailies annually, no? Which is relatively high. And then it's primarily from diarrheal diseases in children under 5 years old. Households, using unimproved water have more than twice higher risk um, in terms of diarrheal disease. Hand washing with soap reduces diarrhea by 29 to 48%, and it's the most cost-effective intervention. And then communities with open defecation rates about 10% show stunting prevalence about 25%. And notably, the cholera outbreaks have been epidemiologically linked to surface water contamination during flooding events. Connecting this directly to our next slide, on climate change. But before going there, therefore, what's now the effect of this study? So it undermines the importance of safe drinking water and yung proper hand washing and yung access to proper sanitation, no? So the importance of functioning drainage and sewage system, and doing the importance of having hygienic practices for all people. Another sustainable development goal is to reduce inequalities. Um, Not just economic, but there's also the health disparities, no? Which can also be measurable. So one of the studies that initially looked into that is this work by Sir Michael Marmot, particularly the Fair Society Healthy Lives Review, drawing on the ELSA, for the English Longitudinal Study of Aging uh, Study, and the World Health Organization Health Equity Reports. Um, the principle here is that the health outcomes systematically worsen at every step down the social ladder. And what were the surprising findings? So in England, there's a 7-year life expectancy gap between the most and least deprived areas. And then there is a 17-year gap in disability-free life expectancy. So that's very significant. Children in the bottom income quintile are 4 times more likely to have mental health disorders. And then, since this was also performed during the COVID pandemic, the data revealed that the Black individuals have 1.6 times higher age-adjusted mortality than white individuals. So again, looking at the inequality of in terms of yung access to healthcare is one of the factors that they uh, they attributed to this finding. And then the indigenous populations globally show 5 to 20 years lower life expectancy than the national averages. So what's the impact? So this work shaped yung health equity metrics. Um, there was an introduction of the concept of proportionate universalism, which targeting resources proportionate, no, to disadvantage rather than applying equal effort everywhere. So in the Philippines, this drove the PhilHealth Indigent Program expansion and indigenous people specific health programs. And then the last would be the climate action. So the study here now would be the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change annual reports, which started in 2017, which look into 47 indicators across these domains: the climate change exposures and impacts, the adaptation and resilience, mitigation, economics, and public engagement. So what were the findings? Heat-related mortality increased by 68% in adults more than 65 years. If you would compare it during the decade of the 90s versus the decade of the 2010s, which is attributed to the climate change, meaning the increase, no, of the average global temperature. Climate suitable transmission days for dengue fever increased by 12% globally. With epidemiologic models which project 2 billion additional people that are at risk by 2080. Air pollution, largely from fossil fuels, caused 3.4 million premature deaths in 2019. Flooding events increased by more than double, 134% over 20 years, each associated with epidemiologically documented rises, no, in cholera, leptospirosis, and mental health disorders. And then finally, yung food insecurity from climate-driven crop failure affects 2% of the global caloric supply per increase of 1 degree centigrade in the temperature. So this evidence base is what drives the World Health Organization climate and health programs, and directly links to this one, the climate action, with the health outcomes in the sustainable development goals. So therefore, climate change is not just an issue about the environment. It is also a health problem that is already ongoing. And uh, we should find ways, no, in order to answer to this call on climate action. So your activity would be looking into a community epidemiology action plan. So First one would be you would choose a real or hypothetical community and identify one particular health, just one specific health issue. It could be dengue, malnutrition, even obesity or tuberculosis. Something that is relevant, no? And hopefully in a local setting. And then you apply epidemiology, meaning you would describe how would you use epidemiologic data to assess the problem. You link it to a framework, meaning you match your issue to a preparedness or response space and explain how epidemiology informs each step. And then finally, connect that particular issue to the a particular one or two sustainable development goals that your community health program addresses and explain the connection. So that would be your assignment for this final session. And finally, there's only four takeaways here. First one is epidemiology drives evidence-based community health program design and evaluation. We've also shown that public health preparedness relies on epidemiologic surveillance across all response phases. And then third, the sustainable development goals progress depends on the studies and the data that comes out of it that would reduce health inequities and makes the sustainable development goals not just an aspirational slogan. And finally, when we integrate epidemiology across this community development, preparedness, and the sustainable development goals, we just don't improve individual programs, we strengthen global public health outcomes as a whole. So thank you for your time, and we'll have a Q&A session later. Thank you.